When Josh asked me to come speak, he said, I'm just curious, do you believe in freedom of speech? You believe in free speech? I said, yes. He said, great, you're going to be giving one. So it's great to be with you. I hope you do not mind if I have coffee while I share with some thoughts, because I find that I do not complete sentences until I have some caffeine in me in the morning. It is wonderful to be with you as the Attorney General, but I never assume in any room I ever walk into that you actually know what I do. I have 3 daughters, Gabriella, Elena, Sophia. They're the diamonds of my heart, and this was brought crystal clear to me the Sunday before I was sworn in. My oldest daughter is 16, and Sunday night's kind of our family, we always carve that as our sacred kind of family gathering, family dinner night. And she said, Daddy, what do I tell my friends at school that you're actually going to be doing? I was in the House of Delegates before I ran for Attorney General. And if you're a father of daughters, you have a desperate desire to impress them. And I thought, here is my chance. And I go, well, honey, I'm going to be the Attorney General. I'm going to be the Chief Law Enforcement Officer for the Commonwealth of Virginia. I'm going to have hundreds of people report to me. I have 21 different sections in my office, everything from major crimes and emerging threats. I have to approve every wiretap from the state police. I oversee an entire civil rights division, an entire consumer protection division, an entire environmental laws division. I think I'm impressing her, and she's like, Dad, are you still an attorney? I said, yes. By statute, you have to be an attorney to do this job. She's like, okay. And you're obviously still an elected official, correct? And I said, yeah, we just went through this campaign. She's like, great. I get to tell my classmates at school that my father is both a lawyer and a politician, the 2 least popular professions in America. And I said, honey, it's all how you frame it. But what we are doing, what we did when we ran in 2021, and what we're doing now, I think, in Virginia with Governor Youngkin and with the Lieutenant Governor, is I call it the Virginia Renaissance. We've seen an explosion of the very, very best of Virginia, people getting back to work. More people are working now. We were in the bottom third nationwide during the pandemic of people getting back to work. Now we're in the top third. And we're seeing this mindset of looking at and empowering the greatest job-creating engine the world has ever seen, which is the American entrepreneur. And my mindset as someone who works with Governor Youngkin on a regular basis is we want to be able to empower those individuals. But the one thing I have, the one mindset I have, as I said, I have over 20 different sections of the law that report to me. But the mindset I tell of everybody that works for me is I want us to view ourselves as the people's protector. That's the mindset, whether it's from major crimes, whether it's their constitutional liberties. And sometimes it also means from federal overreach from Washington. The single most dysfunctional city in America, about an hour plus east of us. And so what we have seen, and people said, what are some things that have surprised you in my position? And one of the things is just how much litigation we're seeing when the federal government oversteps their bounds. I wake up in the morning and I get to sue the federal government. That's a fun job. But if you think about it, so much of the most controversial, the greatest excesses of the Biden administration have not been pieces of legislation. They're not bills debated in Congress and committee on the House floor and then get through the Senate. What are they? They're executive orders and regulations promulgated by unelected bodies, which I personally do not think that is very healthy for our democracy, because what we have seen is that so many congressmen and senators prefer it that way because then they don't have to take hard votes. One of the first pieces of litigation we got involved with in my office was a lawsuit involving OSHA. I'm sure many of y'all remember when it was OSHA that promulgated the regulations that said an employer has to fire their employees. It's not a choice. It's not a decision left to the employer who can evaluate the safety protocols in their own place of business. You have a choice. You're required by law to fire your employees unless they're vaccinated. Not a bill, not debated in Congress. There's no big board up there that you can watch on C-SPAN to see how your congressman or your congresswoman voted yes or no. It was a regulation promulgated by an unelected body. We took them all the way to the Supreme Court and we won. But we've seen that in other areas as well. What I generally like to joke with my staff is, don't change my life without a vote. We're seeing it now with changing the very idea of consumer choice. If you have an electric vehicle, great for you. I have some friends that have them, they love them, great. But I don't think that we should have an unelected body suddenly declaring that you don't have a right to buy a non-electric vehicle, which is exactly what the Biden administration is doing. And again, I don't think that's healthy for democracy. We saw it even with the USDA, which administers a school lunch program around the country. My staff came in, we get regulations get proposed almost on a weekly basis, and they said, listen, we may have to get involved in litigation with the USDA. And I said, I gotta admit, that's not one that we're usually involved with. Why would we ever get involved with litigation with the USDA per se? And they said, because the Biden administration has proposed a regulation that says if you're a school district that accepts so much as one dime of money for reduced lunches for poor and needy kids, as a condition for you accepting that money, you have to also adopt the Biden administration's policies on transgendered athletes in sports. This would affect over 90% of the school districts in the country. And again, not a bill, anything that's voted in Congress. So we put the Biden administration on notice that if they tried to take this proposed regulation and implement it, we would see them in court and they would true it. But what I've quickly realized is, again, you have these regulations that are proposed. Your congressman and your senator, they never vote on them. Your governor, they can complain about them. But the only individuals, the people at the front line to push back on massive federal overreach is your state attorney general. And that goes back to exactly my mission as the people's protector, and I'm honored to do it. The other thing that I think is important, and I say this at every Chamber of Commerce meeting that I go to, is there's a freight train going right into the heart of the small business and entrepreneurial community. And a lot of business owners don't even know that it's barreling towards them at rapid speed. And it is this. When you poll young people, 29 and younger, just as many think that we should organize our economy on the basis of socialism than free markets. Now, my name's a little different, Miyares. It's Cuban. I am not a fan of socialism. The year Fidel Castro took power in Cuba, Cuba had the same GDP as Italy. The year he died, Cuba had the same GDP as Sudan. As Margaret Thatcher noted, the problem with socialism is they always run out of other people's money. But this is what I find utterly remarkable. We have failed to explain one of the greatest economic miracles in human history that has happened right in front of us. In 1980, 25% of the globe lived on less than $2 a day. That is considered starvation level poverty. Since 1980, 1.8 billion people have been lifted out of starvation level poverty on a global scale. That number today, percentage of the globe living at $2 a day or less, is less than 5%. It's the greatest eradication of poverty in human history. We have never seen anything like it, ever. And when I speak at college campuses and in business schools, I ask them, what happened? What led to the greatest eradication of poverty in human history? It's fascinating to get the answers. I'm going to have everything from Obamacare to the United Nations. And it's a word that on college campuses is a word you're not even almost allowed to mutter. Capitalism. It's because countries on different continents, from Chile to South Korea, to India, to China, they went away from top-down government control of their economies, and they went towards free markets. Now, They did not always tragically liberalize their political institutions, but they freed up their economic ones. And all free markets means is I'm going to empower you, the individual. You have a talent. You get to be rewarded for your talent. And it's amazing what happens when you get away from heavy-handed, top-down, command-control economies to empowering the individuals. It's not just the economy that flourishes, it's the arts, it's the sciences. The greatest eradication of poverty in human history has happened in the last 4 decades. It's happened right underneath their noses. And now you have an entire generation of young Americans who absolutely want to replace the same system that has ended so much human misery throughout the globe in so many areas. Think about that for a second. When you poll people, has global poverty gotten worse or gotten better over the last 40 years? Do you know who scores the worst on that question? The same young people that think we should replace free markets with socialism. What has happened in our education system? So my challenge for those in the business community is realize what's coming your way. If you have not done so, and I know this is not always easy, champion and mentor and have interns, young people that can come work with you. And I know that sometimes that could be difficult, but it is so important for a young person to get away from what they perhaps hear in academia and get into the real world with real businesses, and they see some remarkable things. And my wife is a small business owner. You see what it means to meet payroll. You see what those 3 tentacles of taxation, litigation, and regulation that can strangle the life out of a business. You see how if you're an employer and you have an employee that shows up to work on time and gives it their all, you will move heaven and earth to keep them, retain them, promote them, and give them more opportunities. And in some ways, they become like part of your family. See, so many young people don't know that, they don't see that, and they definitely don't hear that. When was the last time you saw on the front page of the New York Times or the Washington Post, capitalism has led to the greatest eradication of poverty in human history? The answer is never. And you sure as heck are not seeing that in their college campuses and in their college classes. So it's going to be up to you. I can only do so much. For me, even when I speak to college students, it's a theory, but when they get to work alongside an intern and be with you, they see firsthand what you do, and there is indeed dignity in work. There's a psychological benefit in work. Getting through COVID, it was like squeezing the air in a balloon. There was extraordinary measures they took to shut down society, and they never bothered to think for a second what's going to be the long-term psychological and mental health impact. And now we're seeing a mental health and addiction crisis in this country unlike anything we've ever seen. So getting people back to work and dignity work, I think, is a huge component of what our governor is advocating. So listen, as I noted, when I look at the people in this room, I don't view you as a small business owner. I view you as a poverty destroyer. You do more to alleviate poverty than almost anything I can ever advocate as an elected official. When I was in the General Assembly, I was chairman of a poverty commission, the Opportunity Commission. We looked at both the root causes of poverty, but what lifts people out of poverty. And the question is not, why is there poverty? I tell my staff all the time, to get to the right answers, you have to first be willing to ask the right questions. The question is not, why is there poverty? Because poverty, ladies and gentlemen, is the default state of human existence. 99% of every human being that has ever lived has lived in abject total poverty. Do you know that? Think about that for a second. The totality of the human experience, 99% of every human being that has ever walked on this planet has lived in abject poverty. The right question to ask is, why is there wealth? What creates it? What lifts people out of poverty and gives them dignity? And what I have realized, and I looked at so much data, I looked at data from the Brookings Institute, which leans to the left, the Heritage Foundation, which leans to the right, looking at the root causes of poverty and what lifts people out of poverty, what creates that wealth. And I realized that for human beings, other than hearing the words, I love you, the single most important words they can ever hear in their life is, you're hired. That can have a life-altering, life-changing impact on their life, a multi-generational impact on the life, because when you look at what's the best way to lift children out of poverty, you know what the best example is? If mom or dad have a job. Because then they see, when they turn 18 and they become an adult, that's the expectations for them. So my attitude first in the House of Delegates and as Attorney General has always had this attitude. How do I make it easier? Not harder, but easier to allow you to say those amazing, life-altering, magical words to more and more people every day, you're hired. That's what I think government should look at. Not as businesses as simply some entity to litigate and regulate and tax to death, but to free them up, to expand, to give that dignity that is so important. That is so much of the mindset that we have right now in Richmond, is empowering our entrepreneurs to allow them to expand, to thrive, and indeed give dignity in the work and lift people out of poverty. So it is an honor to be your Attorney General. I know that there's other things I could talk about, but what I would really like to do is I'd like to hear from you and hear your questions and your thoughts. And so I do not know the format. How are we doing on time? I'm mindful that we're doing all right? Okay, great.
Anybody's got questions? Here we go.
Hey, good morning.
Morning.
I'm Jay Martz. I'm the father of 3 and grandfather of 10, and I'm an advocate for parental rights and school choice. And I'd like to hear from you on the Commonwealth's Constitution and the challenges that we face to get school choice for all of us, all of our parents across the Commonwealth. I understand the Blaine amendments were found to be unconstitutional, and I think they knocked those down a couple years ago, and I was wondering what challenges we face.
Well, we also have you mentioned the Blaine amendments in the Virginia Constitution. I do think that this is something the governor has been advocating for with both lab schools. I think it goes to a larger issue, which is, our education system right now. When I mentioned those numbers about where young people view our free markets, I'll tell you what's even a more startling number. Gallup every year does a poll right around July 4th to just test how people view their country. 18%. 18% of those ages 18 to 34 say they have a love of country. 18%. That did not happen by accident. There's a saying out in Oregon, you don't know how tall a tree is until after it's been cut down. And I pray they never say this about this country. One of the most illustrative moments for me, I'll tell you something that again should trouble, maybe this doesn't trouble you if you're listening, but it troubles me. The most startling thing for me as an elected official is in a span of a week's time, I could start off the week speaking at a naturalization ceremony, right? So that's one of my earliest memories, was my mother coming in our kitchen and asking me to teach her the pledge. And she had to learn it for her naturalization ceremony. She had fled Cuba. And so to this day, it's my favorite thing to do, to welcome these new Americans to freedom. And at the end of the ceremony, I will hand them a $1 American flag. And it's like handing them a diamond. They're so grateful. And I tell my daughters all the time, gratitude's the most underrated of human traits. Ingratitude's the ugliest, but gratitude, wow, it's the most underrated. And then a week later, I'll be on a college campus or some prep school where the tuition costs more than my car. And the only word I can use to describe how those young people view this country is disdain. Utter disdain. It is not the children of immigrants that are not grateful towards this country. Too often, it is the children of privilege. And that, ladies and gentlemen, breaks my heart. I was in a was a prep school. And I had a young person that said that they did not view America as in any way redeemable. They viewed it as inherently racist and bigoted and broken. If that is what you are teaching our kids, what you're really saying is America can never be at peace with itself. That it's irredeemable. And I said, I never said America was a perfect country, but we are a noble one. And he said, prove it. And easiest answer would have been, go to Arlington National Cemetery. But I told the class, actually, let's do this exercise right now. I had the whole class do this. Everybody do this. You have special dispensation. Take out your cell phones. Everybody do this right now. We'll see if this still works, right? Take out your cell phones. Everybody take out their cell phones? I'm going to do it too. We'll see if it works for me. Go to Google, type in Korea at night. 3 words. I told this entire class, type in these 3 words. Korea at night. Or AC/DC. I asked this class, I said, type in these 3 words, Korea at night. And if you haven't pulled it up on your phone, you could see Korea from space. And I asked this class, I said, that's amazing. You have a peninsula where the people speak the same language, have the same culture. They're the same people, but half of that peninsula is in light. They're in a society where they can criticize their leaders, they can vote for their leaders, they can go to the play, pick up a book they want to read. Now, and half of that peninsula is in darkness, utter, complete darkness. And I asked these students, why? Why do you have a peninsula that half is in light and half is in darkness? And this young man at this very, very expensive prep school didn't know the answer to that. And I realized they don't call the Korean War the Forgotten War for nothing. And I told them, and it astonished me this class had not heard this, that it's because 40,000 Americans crossed an ocean, went to a land where they didn't speak the language, they didn't know the people, and they fought and they bled and they died, defeating one of the worst evils the world had ever seen, Soviet communism. And they never asked for glory and they never asked for riches. The only land they ever asked for was a place to bury their dead. And you don't know that it even happened? So yeah, we should teach all of our history. We should teach the good and the bad. Absolutely. We have some horrific chapters in our history. It's the only way to learn from it. But as I ask these young people, the real question though is, compared to what? When you look at the United States, it's compared to what? If you compare us to perfection, we will fail. It's comparing us to every other country that has ever existed. And we've given more second chances to more people than any other that has ever existed on this planet. My mother fled Cuba as a scared, homeless 19-year-old girl in 1965, the fall of 1965. And almost 50 years to the day that she left, in the fall of 2015, she was able to go into a voting booth and get a ballot with her son's name on it. And was able to vote for me to represent her in the oldest democracy in the Western Hemisphere, the Virginia General Assembly. That is the American miracle. That is too often not being taught in our schools. And that's why there's such a clamoring for people to have choice and empowerment. It's called, in my view, it's parental empowerment. It's why the governor is pushing lab schools. Because I think at the end of the day, parents are desperate. And there's a lot of byproducts of COVID, but one of the byproducts of COVID was kids were coming home and they were seeing what was being taught in their schools, and parents' eyes were open. And I think parental empowerment is going to be one of the great fights and discussions we have in our time. Yes, sir. I'm sorry for the long-winded answer, but you got me wild up. Sorry about that.
That's okay. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Janice Walt Grenadier. I live in the city of Alexandria. I've been working out here with some people in Winchester, especially Dana. I am a victim of our judiciary. I carry this comb and this cross with me. It represents freedom to me. I was illegally jailed in 2014. Miyares is familiar with this. So that Senator Mark Warner could get reelected. I was held in solitary confinement till 5 o'clock on Election Day, when someone came to my cell and said, "You're no longer in solitary. We found the 17,000 votes we needed for Senator Mark Warner to win." He was running against Ed Gillespie. I had a blog. He had traded a federal judgeship. Didn't stop there. Actually, I was jailed because all of my evidence in my court case was mailed back to me in the city of Alexandria. I've stood in front of the legislature, Jason Miyares. On January 10th of this year, in court, Judge Francine, after Jason Miyares' office had lied in court documents, yes, stated, "I would sanction you for $50,000 if I had it my way. I would make it due time certain, I would call it contempt, and I would jail you." My question to you is, every single person in here, this could happen to you. I'm not alone. I started judicialpedia.com and had over 2 million views last year, and I've already reached that this year. What are you going to do for all of us to give us some type of redress? Because the jerk is corrupt, the Virginia State Bar is corrupt, we have no place to go. And I've done 15 years studies on this. Not one complaint is listened to. Not one person who goes to the hearings of judges is listened to. They're politely given 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute, depending on how much they don't like you. I love my country. I love my Constitution. I don't want to see it happening to anyone. What are you going to do about it?
Well, listen, I think that equal protection law is one of the hallmarks of our society. It is one of the absolute unique things that makes us unique. I also think that one of the most precious things we have is an independent judiciary. If you think about it, I would probably respectfully disagree, because if you go to North Korea, if you go to Russia, if you go to China, if you go to Cuba, let me finish. If you go to any of those countries, what they have is people in power order the judges what to do. When I call us the American miracle, one of the most miraculous things we have, there's two aspects of our country that are very unique. One of which is we have a written constitution that absolutely limits what government can do. That's the first thing. It's the first written constitution in human history that empowers the individual and limits what government could do. In England, it is one act of parliament that could take away your rights of freedom of speech. Do you know that? One act. It takes one act of parliament. The fact that we have a written constitution that absolutely limits what government can do is utterly remarkable. The second is, when I served in the General Assembly, we would vote for judges. At that point, separation of powers, I am not allowed, first as a legislature and now as the executive branch, I'm not allowed to order a judge to do anything. It actually violates the Virginia Constitution because we have very explicit separation of powers. And I think the founders designed it that way for a reason, because they were paranoid about two things: anarchy and monarchy. They did not want power centralized, and they did not want the rights of the mob to trample on the rights of the individual. So, ma'am, I am not completely familiar with your case. But what I would say is this, is I am a passionate believer that every single person should be treated with dignity and respect. If you have not been doing so, then what I would recommend that you do, if you feel like your civil rights have been violated, then we have an Office of Civil Rights in my office. But I do not have the power to order or tell a judge to do anything, because if I did so, it would violate the Virginia Constitution, which I took an oath of office on January 15, 2022 to uphold, and I'm not going to do that. Next question.
Good morning. My name is Gary Krause. I'm a husband, father, soon to be 3 beautiful girls. And
3 daughters?
3 daughters, yep. Third one's going to be a girl, too.
Welcome to the club.
Navy veteran, 11 years, 4 months, and 3 days. Not that anybody was counting. Did a couple of overseas tours during that time. And I have a question that might be a little bit uncomfortable, but it is something that our country was founded on, the topic is, and it's something that's brought about great positive change within our country since its inception. And it's a very pointed question. Do you support civil disobedience for unconstitutional regulations?
Do I support civil disobedience? That is a fascinating question. I think the American that best encapsulated that answer, and I think it's one of the most remarkable documents ever written by an American, and if you know the circumstances, if you get a chance to read it and then you understand the circumstances, it's mind-blowing, is a letter from a Birmingham jail from Dr. Martin Luther King. He was jailed and he was protesting the horrific status of segregation. When you read the letter from a Birmingham jail, what's most remarkable is how much he was able to quote verbatim for some of the greatest thinkers in human history, and he did not have access to any notes when he was in prison, but he was challenging Christians and the church and America to essentially live up to its ideals. Margaret Thatcher once said that in Europe all the countries emerged out of history, but America is the only country to emerge out of a philosophy. Or as G.K. Chesterton noted, America is the only country in the history of the world to ever be founded on a creed. And what is that creed? Now, I've always felt that the American that best encapsulated that was Dr. King later on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, when he said those rights laid out in our Declaration of Independence of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He called that the promissory note made to every American, past, present, and future. So I think we could draw enormous inspiration for that, because one of the things that Dr. King wrote about were laws that were just and unjust, laws that violated our principles of dignity and equal protection of the law. And if you think about it, every time we've ever made an advancement in this country on the road towards equality, who did we look to? Was it Rousseau? Was it Confucius? No, it was a quiet lawyer from Charlottesville who was not a very good speaker, but he was a brilliant thinker. And he wrote the birth certificate for a nation, Thomas Jefferson, and his 200th birthday is coming up in just 2.5 years. And so we have this remarkable, or his death, sorry, not birthday. I'm sure my staff is not happy with that. So here's what I would say is, I think this, I think that we also, democracy works and mobocracy does not. Because once you go down that path, you could justify unspeakable evil in the name of, quote, of whether you call it social justice or pick your topic. And let me tell you something. If you look throughout the totality of human history, thank God we have the rule of law in this country. And the idea is we have both the courts and democracy so we can petition our issues and our redresses. If people think it's okay to commit acts of violence towards their fellow American, that is not how you solve our political problems. One of my favorite presidents is Ronald Reagan. And he said this, you can applaud, but he said this at his first inaugural, and it's one of my favorite quotes of his. He said, "How can you claim to love your country if you don't first love your fellow countrymen?" Now, I'm a person of faith as well, and so that also goes directly to my faith as well, is also loving those that we disagree with. And it can be hard because a wise person once noted that politics is downstream from culture, and as our culture has gotten more coarse, so is our politics, and that grieves me. That grieves me. I had a wise Marine once share with me, they said, if you go to Arlington National Cemetery and you walk among those crosses and those stars of David's, there's not an R or a D next to anyone's name. In other words, someone that maybe you disagree with politically has given the last full measure of devotion to this remarkable country. In summary, the person that disagrees with you politically is not your enemy. So let's not act like it. Next question.
Got time for probably, unfortunately, one more question. Go ahead.
Good morning. You touched on our American history a little bit. I'd like to know what's being done currently, what's the current status of the Robert E. Lee statue on his horse. He used to be sitting in Richmond. There were some ugly rumors, so I want to know what the truth is. What is being done with the General Lee statue right now today?
Well, it's not on Monument Avenue anymore. I mean, it's in storage. Was the last report I heard. Well, those reliable sources have not shared that with me, but I have not heard anything regarding, not that I have seen legally, candidly. Because of the way the courts have ruled on who actually owns the land. And then also there's a standing issue as well. Well, the land, I mean, listen, I have not looked at the fact, I have not looked at the, okay, I have not heard anybody trying to destroy anything. I've heard it's literally locked up in storage near Tredegar Iron Works, I think is where it was.